I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Rumneek. I currently serve as the publisher of PressProgress, an award-winning nonprofit investigative news outlet. I might be a bit biased, but I'm really looking forward to this next session. It will give you the chance to see what I get to see on a daily basis. See, I have a front row seat to some of Canada's most crucial, untold stories, investigations that hold the powerful accountable with their influence on our politics, our economy, and our communities, how their money and their power impacts our lives, our families, our neighbors, our coworkers. I'm talking about the investigative work of the awesome editorial team at PressProgress. They're a mighty team of full-time unionized journalists that spans across the country. Currently from British Columbia, our associate editor, Rumneek Johal, to Alberta with our reporter, Stephen Magusiak, to the Prairies with Labour reporter, Emily Leedham, and to Ontario with our editor, LeBrun. This year is especially great for this team because we're celebrating 10 years of PressProgress. Thank you. We're excited too. And that's actually what you'll be hearing about today. We'll be moderated by our good friend, Andre Goulet, Executive Director at Harbinger Media, Canada's progressive podcast community, and lead organizer at unrigged.ca, one of my co-conspirators, which is Canada's collective progressive journalism website. Please join me with a warm welcome for our next guest, the PressProgress team, as they share with us how it's been an exciting 10 years of making an impact.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Andre Goulet, and I'm super excited to be here with the PressProgress team. It's a really inspiring several days we're spending with everyone. A lot of intellect, a lot of passion, a lot of solidarity, and a lot of shared values. Values that we see represented with our friends from PressProgress. I've known these guys for a long time through my work with podcasting and media, and interviewed Emily, I think 6 or 7 years ago, Magusiak 6 or 7 years ago. So watching them sort of like grow, expand, and succeed has been amazing. And the last thing I'll say before we get into some more introductions is that, to me, they're always kind of like the band, like the rock band of Canadian progressive media, because they're idiosyncratic, they're really cool, and they do rock-solid journalism. So let's welcome again, from Winnipeg, Emily Leedham. From Calgary, Stephen Magusiak. From Surrey, BC, Rumneek Johal. And hometown hero from the nation's capital, Ottawa, LeBrun. We want to begin by just giving a quick introduction about who we are, super fast. Emily, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm the PressProgress's senior labor reporter. I started out as the Prairie reporter covering Manitoba and Saskatchewan. I'm also the editor of Shift Work, which is our weekly national labor newsletter. We do a roundup of the top labor news across Canada, and we track strikes and lockouts across Canada. This is the only place that tracks strikes and lockouts. So it's been really great. I've been able to get a real bird's eye view on what's happening in labor, and yeah, that's thanks to being at PressProgress.
Thank you, Stephen.
Hi, everyone. It sounds like it's working. I'm Stephen Magusiak. I'm the Alberta reporter. I came into the organization around 2019 when the Alberta election was happening, starting around the same time as Alex Koch, one of our alumni, who is a good friend of the show. He is now with the Maple, and yeah, I've been here for, I'm starting to feel old, 5 years.
It's been a while, yeah. Stephen, thank you. Rumneek.
Hi, I am the BC reporter and the associate editor at PressProgress. I've been a part of the team since August 2022. It's been super fun. I do reporting on workers, on the overdose crisis in BC, international students, immigrant communities, and diaspora communities across Canada. And yeah, I also run our TikTok. So if you would like to follow us, this is a shameless plug. you should follow us on TikTok.
Thank you, and Luke.
My name is Luke LeBrun. I'm the editor of PressProgress, and based here in Ottawa, cover federal politics, also stuff to do with far-right extremism and some of the convoy-type characters that we've been seeing, in the streets around here for the last year or two. Yeah, that's it.
10 years and having like the 10-year anniversary or birthday is pretty amazing because progressive Canadian journalism, having an organization like PressProgress, we're lucky to have them, right? So we wanted to sort of pay tribute a little bit to some of the names who've come through institutionally over the last 10 years. Emily, who did you want to highlight?
Yeah, well, one of my first interactions with PressProgress was Luke Savage, who previously worked here, and he wrote an article about a developer in Winnipeg, actually, that was wanting to destroy wetlands, basically. And there was a group of people who didn't want this to happen, and they were protesting, and this developer took them to court and sued them, and he was just really, really aggressive, because he was like, yeah, he was quite aggressive. And so PressProgress did a story on that, and it was really great and encouraging because these protesters were it was a very stressful situation. And so this article, it went viral. It got so much support. It got support from people in the States as well. It just really highlighted the issue. And so I just thought that was a really great example of what progressive journalism can do in highlighting issues of people standing up to people in power.
And in terms of the sort of family aspect and the legacy, Luke's a co-author with Ed Broadbent on his book, which of course is a wonderful book that many of us have read. Luke is also an editor with Jacobin, and Luke had a viral tweet during the solar eclipse because in Toronto it was super cloudy, so he complained about it, and he had 17,000 people like his tweet. So Luke's original, great guy. Magusiak, who is the hero you want to highlight?
Alex Gosh, because we started at the same time and we worked on some stuff together, mostly involving Jason Kenney and the kind of suspicious rise to taking control of the UCP. This involved him and I getting a hold of a mailing list, an actual full list of every single member of the United Conservative Party, and just calling up strangers together, spending a couple days at that. So this was early days.
Alex Kosh, now one of the lead editors at The Maple, and they do amazing work there too. And kind of like a buddy journalism organization, PressProgress are friends with them. It's nice to have that sort of familial aspect with independent Canadian journalism as well. Thanks, Stephen. Rumneek, who can you highlight?
So our former colleague, Mitchell Thompson, he was our Ontario reporter, and Mitchell was notorious for really going after the big dogs, and I really love that about him. Some of his reporting even won awards during the pandemic. He was doing some reporting on Tim Hortons. Him and I actually worked together on a story about Help Seeker in Toronto, so you can check all of those out. But yeah, Mitchell was really known to go after the far right in a big way, and yeah.
Who did he go on? Where did he go on to? What's the name of that organization?
I believe he's with the Karl Marx Library.
Oh, yeah?
Is that correct?
We don't know.
We don't know where he is.
Oh yeah.
He's doing important research and archiving work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mitchell's wonderful because you can sit down with him and have a beer and he'll talk for 27 minutes about something fascinating that you had no idea about, some idiosyncratic ephemera about journalism or politics or history. Love Mitchell. Thank you, Rumneek. And Luke, who would you like to name drop?
I'd like to pay tribute to Sarah Schmidt, who was the first and original editor of PressProgress. Sarah hired me back in 2013, which is, oh my God, a decade ago now, thinking about it. And she really had a big influence, I think, in our culture and in terms of our approach to doing news. She came from originally from the Ottawa Citizen and did a lot of consumer affairs reporting. She was focused on the airline industry and things like that. And so a lot of her reporting relied on access to information requests, freedom of information, that kind of stuff, looking at government documents, public documents. And that kind of approach, I think, has had a lasting impact on just the way that we approach things, right? We're looking for documents or information that's contradicting the messages that are being put out by the government of the day. So pay tribute to Sarah Schmidt for her enduring contributions to PressProgress.
So Sarah, Mitchell, Luke, and Alex, and lots of other wonderful people who've been part of PressProgress over the last 10 years. Luke is 67 years old, so he began with PressProgress in his mid-50s. Luke, you've seen it all, and you've seen this organization grow from the very beginnings to today. And again, 10 years is not nothing, right? Like, it's amazing that it's not only grown, but just sort of become more and more solid and has a wonderful reputation. So can you walk us through a little bit about that legacy, and also how the legacy ties in to Ed Broadbent's principles, and how that's sort of the guiding force behind some of the work, and a lot of the work that you guys do?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the analysis in the beginning was this idea that the media landscape in Canada was dominated by right-wing newspapers, you know, like the Post Medias and the National Posts and what have you. And you know, often you would have these right-wing think tanks like the Fraser Institute, or right-wing advocacy organizations like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who would put out reports, and then those reports would be kind of uncritically picked up by those newspapers, or their experts would end up getting quoted in the news stories. And you know, this aggravated a lot of people because you know their right-wing talking points were kind of being you know, amplified in an uncritical way. So originally PressProgress was thought of as kind of more of like a fact-checking unit. So the idea would be that if the Fraser Institute puts out a report, we would have a fact check on it, you know, within 24 hours or something like that. But the interesting thing is, you know, while we were doing this fact-checking work, we would accidentally stumble across things that no one else had noticed. So, and you know, it just comes with, you know, monitoring groups that no one else is really paying close attention to. And so, you know, we've seen PressProgress evolve from that sort of, you know, fact-checking unit type thing into what we're doing now, which is investigative journalism. And it's really interesting because that evolution has been kind of organic, and it's just happened really naturally. So for example, one of our first big stories that we broke, you know, Rex Murphy, I found this video of Rex Murphy giving a speech to a conference of oil executives, and it was just really over-the-top stuff attacking climate science and environmentalists and so forth. And I started getting to work sort of fact-checking the stuff that he was saying, and in the process of doing that, I suddenly realized, like, you know, he's been giving a lot of these speeches over the last couple years, and I ended up finding over 25 paid speeches that Rex Murphy was giving to these oil industry events. And you know, at the same time, Rex Murphy is on CBC, also attacking environmentalists and, you know, spreading kind of climate denial type messages on CBC. So, you know, on one hand, he's getting paid by all of these, you know, industry groups to give speeches, and then at the same time kind of appearing on CBC. So as a result of that reporting, CBC actually changed its policies on, you know, their on-air personalities. Like, they were banned from doing paid speeches. They had to start disclosing, like, what kind of payments they were getting from, you know, lobbyists and industry groups and that kind of a thing. And I still think to this day, like, that first story that like a big story that we broke, really kind of captures what we're trying to do, because you know, the impact of that investigative work you know, led to real material change, right? CBC changed its policy. So that's the kind of work that we're trying to do today, you know, stuff that makes an impact.
And how does that work? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is strong, it's powerful work, and like, it does often seem like PressProgress for many years was one of the only kind of anti-fascist voices in Canadian media, calling out, I mean, not that Murphy's a fascist, but like that sort of like bad acting and contradiction and hypocrisy. Let's pull it into the values though, because it's really interesting that you guys are essentially like journalism gumshoes, right? They're detectives. They're sleuthing out the stories, which I love about the work they do. But how does your values drive that? How does that tie into Ed and his values and his legacy? What does that mean to you guys, Luke?
So the Broadbent Institute has the Broadbent Principles, is what they call it. You know, the Toronto Star has the Atkinson Principles. We have the Broadbent Principles. For Ed, you know, social democracy in a nutshell is the idea that you want to extend democratic principles to the political sphere. but also to the economic sphere and the social sphere, right? So with that in mind, we have different issue areas that we kind of focus on. So, issues of economic inequality and labor unions. We also look at, stuff involving social inequality and that kind of a thing. And then also like democratic institutions. We continue to fact check disinformation and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the way we approach things, right? We have like these issue areas that we, focus on. There are beats. And then we, investigate and do, sort of traditional journalism where we're, just really focused on these issue areas with certain sets of, concerns in mind while we're looking for stories.
Exactly, and we're going to talk about some of those stories now and highlight some of the work that these guys are especially proud of. Just as an aside, though, we would be remiss not to mention Peter Mansbridge briefly worked for PressProgress and was fired because he didn't put the work in. He wasn't good enough. So it's that kind of, you guys bring a high quality to your work, right?
Yeah, he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, he had a chip on his shoulder. Let's talk about the work that they do. When we were preparing this conversation for you guys, I really wanted them to kind of talk about one of the stories that was meaningful to them in their career, that meant a lot to them in terms of the work, or that maybe like really reflected their passions, their values, their interests, and stuff like that. So let's begin with Emily, who like labor's kind of your beat. I mean, it's basically your beat, among other things. So tell us a little bit about that reporting. What does that look like to you? And what was a story that was especially meaningful to you that you worked on?
Yeah, definitely. I've really specialized in labor reporting over the past 5 years before I worked for PressProgress. When I came on to PressProgress, I was doing a lot of different kinds of reporting as well, like reporting on politics, big money in politics, the far right, but definitely always kept that kind of focus on labor. And yeah, the story that I wanted to talk about, it's a series of stories, which I think are really interesting and showed some real-world impact, but also just the benefit of being in a beat for an extended period of time and building contacts and building people who trust you, who can come to you with stories, and you can kind of work together, because that's a really important part about journalism. It's a lot of it is the sources, is the people who decide to share their story with you, share information with you. A lot of times they're doing the heavy lifting, and then you are kind of putting it together into a story. So. And
from the outside, we don't always think about that relationship building being such a major part of what you guys do, so I love knowing that. Okay, take us behind the scenes. What was the story? Who were the relationships?
Yeah, so the Globe and Mail has this list of 100 top employers that they publish every year. It's produced by a third party, so it's technically sponsored content, but the Globe and Mail had put its logo on this booklet and in the newspaper and on the website. So a couple years ago, in the first years of the pandemic, Cargill was named one of Canada's top employers. And I'm not sure if you recall, but Cargill had one of the worst COVID breakouts in North America that resulted in worker deaths, and it was subject to an RCMP investigation.
What kind of employer is it?
Yeah, Cargill is a they were doing it was a meat packing plant. So there's a meat packing plant in Alberta, and it had a huge breakout, and actually the Globe and Mail did a big investigation into the breakout. So it was very interesting that there's this big investigation by the Globe and Mail, but then also this top employers list published by the Globe and Mail was saying that they were a top employer. So a group of occupational health and safety researchers and experts, shout out to Sean Tucker specifically, were like, okay, what is going on here? Why is Cargill getting a top employer award? And they wrote an open letter to the Globe and Mail criticizing the choice. They asked for Cargill to be taken off the list, but the Globe didn't publish the open letter. So we wrote a story at PressProgress, and we reached out to the Globe and we asked them what's going on. And the Globe ended up apologizing, and they said that they would work with the third party to review the award criteria. They reiterated that the top employer awards are sponsored content. In the future, we'll make sure it's more clear that it's sponsored content, it's not news. But they didn't remove Cargill from the list. 2 years later, Suncor was awarded a top employer award. This was despite Suncor CEO resigning that year over a string of worker deaths. So again, these occupational health and safety experts were like, hey, we thought you were going to fix this. This is unacceptable. So we reached out to the Globe again, and this time the Globe recognized, like, okay, like, does not look good for the Globe. This is a big issue because, again, their own reporters had been publishing investigations reporting on Suncor CEO's resignation. So again, here's the sponsored content with the Globe's logo on it saying Suncor was a top employer. So Globe and Mail publisher Philip Crawley actually told me over the phone that Suncor would no longer be participating in the top employer awards and that there would be improved occupational health and safety criteria in the awards. And additionally, the Globe would take its logo off of the awards and change its business relationship with the third party that produced these top 100 employer awards. So we often talk about worker organizing through unions and community initiatives, but I thought this was a great and unique example of occupational health and safety experts organizing to say to these massive companies, you can't rehabilitate your image with public relations in one of Canada's biggest newspapers after you kill workers. You can't do that. So that was a story that I really...
And it's this kind of outsider journalism that allows like being contentious, because obviously the Globe can't be contentious with like corporate sponsorship, even when it's lethal corporate sponsorship. So that's awesome to hear, and it's that sort of work that PressProgress does really well, and it's why they need the support of people like us to help fund the work they do. Emily, thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Next, Stephen Magusiak's beat, UCP, Jason Kenney, the prairies, the big blue skies, but that's not all. You, Stephen, have made it your life's work to really follow the freaks that are kind of pushing forward a lot of the bad work being done in Alberta. So talk to us a little about that. Bring us behind the scenes. What's that like?
This actually goes back to before I was with PressProgress. I've always been completely fascinated with Western separatists, following their Facebook pages and just the absolutely insane things they posted.
You're born and raised in Calgary, right?
I am. I'm born and raised in Calgary, so I began following that, and yeah, it's been a thing ever since. And so yeah, following the rise of the UCP and Jason Kenney taking over the party and awkwardly trying to appease these people was interesting to watch, like him driving around in his truck, trying to pretend like he's one of them. It didn't work. It didn't last long, as we saw, but yeah, I chose these pieces because I've been following the rise of this one particular group quite a lot, called Take Back Alberta. What is Take Back Alberta? They're a group that credits themselves with bringing Danielle Smith to power in Alberta, and they have some claim to that. They were excellent at organizing people in huge numbers to show up at UCP AGMs to vote in their candidates, to get rid of Jason Kenney, and bring Smith in.
Real grassroots organizing with real right-wing values.
Yeah, and they are basically a coalition of far-right separatists, Christian nationalists, as well as the grifters, but maybe I'll get into that a little bit later. But they are significant in their accomplishments in terms of organizing, and they are a major force in Alberta right now. They are splintering a little bit, though. And so I wanted to highlight these pieces because they show that they start to fight sooner or later. I mean, I follow a lot of convoy types, and as we saw with the convoy, they don't always get along, and they start to turn on each other. And sometimes it's a bit of a trade secret. That's where we get our sources.
So actually, like about that, with Take Back Alberta, they were like instrumental in pushing back against Kenney when he was in power. So it was like the far right pulling the far right. What is it like? What was it like to cover that? How do you cultivate sources? And what's a top story that you feel you produced in the last couple of years about that?
I'm going with the recent one on this because we managed to be the first to prove that Elections Alberta is currently looking into the finances behind this group. They never report them. They refuse to report who's giving them money. And they're now being under a serious investigation by the local election oversight body. And I found this out by getting a hold of Take Back Alberta's former chief financial officer, who basically would just dish this out back in November. The Globe and Mail then recently just put out a story being like, hey, breaking news, Elections Alberta's investigating. I was like, yeah, come on, like we broke this in November, but such as
So Globe and Mail played catch up with your reporting?
They did and did not credit us, but I'm not salty about it.
So that's a. Do you feel like this is your beat? Like, is this something you're compelled to follow and report on, as someone who's kind of like just locked into Alberta every day when you wake up in the morning?
Yeah, I would say this is my primary beat. I'm also following what's happening with charter schools. Alberta is the only province that has charter schools in Canada, and that's a whole thing too. But yeah, no, I would say the far right, and just talking to these sometimes scary, sometimes amusing characters is a big part of what I do.
What's the funnest part? I wanted to say what's the most challenging part of covering that kind of stuff in Alberta, because being a progressive, despite Alberta having had an NDP government once, it's challenging. I lived there for 8 years. It's challenging being a progressive. But I don't want to ask what's the most challenging. I want to ask what's the most satisfying aspect of doing the kind of work you do, confronting the freaks who push the right wing in Alberta.
It's funny how willing a lot of these people are to talk to you. And so sometimes I'll end up in like an hour and a half long conversation over the phone, and they're just venting and talking and calling me a communist, and then just like insulting their friends. And I just kind of patiently nod along like, yeah. And then suddenly I'll just be like, whoops, you shouldn't have told me that. And that'll give me like a story.
Okay, last thing, and then we'll move on to Rumneek. I'm curious, Stephen, like, because your personality is very chill, when you engage with a source, how do you hook them? How do you like pull them in?
Sometimes I just play like a dumb guy on the phone, like, oh, hey, how's it going? I'm just looking over these numbers on Elections Alberta. I just wanted to clarify something. My boss is just telling me to ask this question. I'm just a normal guy. Sometimes I approach it like that, to be honest.
That works?
It works,
okay.
Often. Or just like be respectful, and then sometimes they'll just like, yeah, they want to talk. A lot of them just really want to talk.
So again, I want to call attention to just the different ways in which our friends are able to approach the work they do. I love that. Stephen, thank you. Next, Rumneek Johal, in Surrey and in BC. Tell us a little bit about the work you do. You've been with PressProgress for a couple of years, and a story that you created that had an impact on you, and that you feel had a real impact outside of this community.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about some reporting from last year. I did a story on international students from India in BC that were dying from drug overdoses. And the way that I found this story was I was actually reading a Punjabi news story, so it was in Punjabi, and it was like mentioned in the story, but there was no mainstream media reporting on that, despite the fact that what they were suggesting in this story was that there's a high rate of students' bodies being transported back to India after having died from drug overdoses. And so I reached out to the leader of a Gurdwara, a Sikh temple in BC, to talk about this. And I had to conduct the interview in Punjabi and kind of dig into it a little bit through GoFundMe pages. And that was the only access I had to information about this, because the government doesn't track or doesn't release disaggregated data on race-based data on drug overdoses. And so digging into that, it showed that there was a lack of resources available for this community who were clearly disproportionately impacted. There's a language barrier there, there's cultural differences there, and it really wasn't being reported anywhere else. And so I got the opportunity to dig into this and learn how big of an issue it is. And I think it also speaks to the importance of having a diverse team, because I was only able to find that story because I belong to that community. And I think that a lot of these stories are going untold in Canadian newsrooms, partially for that reason, partially because we don't have the diversity to tell those stories, and partially because people aren't looking. And I think that, again, speaks to who's doing the asking of questions.
And I first was exposed to that story when you actually appeared on the PressProgress podcast, PressProgress Sources. So Magusiak was hosting you and having a conversation with you, and it was like a really interesting kind of personal in a different way to find out about the story than just reading it. So I loved that you guys were able to do your storytelling in a different medium as well. But Rumneek, you approach your work like yesterday, you were at the Inquiry, and you were talking about this yesterday. You were there for like, what, 7 hours?
10 hours.
Jeez. So this is the Inquiry. Tell us a bit about this. This was the Inquiry 4. Why were you there? What did you discover? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the Foreign Interference Commission is taking place. So there's been hearings over the last couple of months, periodically. Yesterday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was testifying at the Inquiry, and so I thought I would use my whatever free time I had to go watch that. And it was really, honestly, nerdy for me to say this, but it was very interesting, some of it, not all 10 hours. But because I've been doing reporting on the Inquiry, I've been focusing a lot on India as a foreign interference threat in Canada. And again, that's something that hasn't been highlighted previously, although a lot of the Sikh Canadian community has sounded the alarms about foreign interference by India over the last years and last few years. And it's been well documented, publicly documented. And it really wasn't something that was being spoken about until the murder of by Hardeep Singh Nijjar last year in Surrey. And so for me, digging into that, again, being one of the very few racialized folks in that inquiry, in that room, was very important because I think we're designed to not feel welcome in those spaces. And I took it upon myself to take up space and also hope that I could find the answers that I was looking for. I didn't, because they didn't focus much on India, which I think is telling in and of itself. But it was an interesting experience overall.
Yeah, and what you told me yesterday was like they focused on China, obviously, because that's the scary thing, when India should probably be focused on as well. I also understand that you told me last night, I don't remember, you did or didn't pet the bomb-sniffing dog?
I wanted to pet the bomb-sniffing dog and then decided against it. I kind of was there for a long time, saw the dog. It's like, I love dogs, but
Absolutely.
Decided the security would not be pleased with me. So.
And I do want to point out the nerd aspect. It's like, yeah, come to Ottawa, fly in from Surrey, and like an hour later, go to hang out for 10 hours at the Inquiry. Thank you. Like, amazing. I love that. Thank you, Rumneek. Okay, really quickly, let's get to Luke, and then we want to go a little deeper behind the scenes to get a little gossipy and talk about some cool, fun, like, interesting secrets from these guys. But Luke, tell us a little bit about some of your top work. What I observed was that during the convoy, because you live in Ottawa, you were on the ground and you were doing very like aggressively investigative reporting. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, for the last decade, I've been covering right-wing politics and far-right extremism. At the start of the pandemic, like in April 2020, 1 month after the lockdown started, we covered the first anti-lockdown protests and looked into who the organizers were behind these sorts of things. And like, I remember like Canada Day 2020, like I went for a bike ride and like came across this, they were trying to go to the US Embassy to ask Trump to like arrest Trudeau for some reason.
Amazing.
It made absolutely no sense.
Makes sense.
And I saw this stuff evolve. It's been really surreal. And then, one day, so after, like, this is my beat for a decade, I see this stuff evolving through the pandemic. And then, one weekend in January 2022, I've got like 50 vehicles outside of my house, like my personal house. I've got 50 vehicles in my street, okay? And people are like tailgating, they're like drinking in the streets, they're like defecating like everywhere. Like, it's really outrageous. And, then I'm looking at my TV and the pictures I'm seeing are of these like bouncy castles and, it looks very, family friendly or whatever, because this is the image that they deliberately wanted to project, right? And, so most people who aren't from Ottawa probably saw these images that would have happened within a 1 or 2 block radius of Parliament Hill. And part of the reason for that is because I think a lot of the media outlets have their offices pretty close to Parliament Hill, so it would make sense that you would send a camera crew to like walk around the corner and take pictures of what's going on. Meanwhile, in the residential areas, like, 10 blocks away from Parliament Hill, you have people sleeping in like sedans in the like residential streets. These are like streets with 2-story houses. This is not the downtown area. Like, this is very, very residential.
You were literally on the front line in your own hometown, where you have been born and raised.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did that inform the reporting you did, and how did you approach that?
Exactly. So, I'm seeing this, like, I've got this dissonance between what I'm seeing on TV and what I'm seeing in reality, right? So I made a point of, at night I would go out in my car and I'd just drive around to all the areas that people aren't, going out to LeBrun Flats, going out. So they took over the baseball stadium. We used to have a AAA baseball team, the farm team of the Montreal Expos, actually.
Okay. Yeah, great.
A little piece of trivia.
From Montreal.
There.
Okay. Yeah. They've been dead a long time.
They
but
took
okay.
over this 10,000-seat stadium, and people weren't really talking about it too much, but they built this like elaborate base camp there. I was driving around the city. I was, trying to document as much as I could, like how many vehicles were places, like where they actually were, how deep into the residential areas they were. At one point, I drove out to Embrun, Ontario, about 30 minutes east of Ottawa, and I found another base camp. It was really surreal because I got off the 417 highway, and they had put up their own like highway signs. Like there was like an alternative highway sign system that had been erected, and there's like an OPP station nearby. No one's doing anything. And so I'm like, in this community, I'm just wondering, like, how is this rural community just been like taken over by this convoy? There's like, hundreds and hundreds of people who have just sort of set up camp in a farm field. And I ended up, reaching out to people in this community and finding out that people were really scared. Like, they felt abandoned and they didn't feel like they had a voice, or, they couldn't do anything. So anyways, a lot of my reporting during the convoy was focused on the stuff that was happening away from Parliament Hill, stuff in the residential areas, stuff in rural communities outside of Ottawa, because these were stories that weren't being reported, and so I tried to focus on that stuff.
Ottawa population, what, 800,000 or whatever, and
Million.
like the two papers in town are the Citizen and the Sun, and they're both post-media rags. So like Luke being able to do this sort of like on-the-ground investigative reporting during one of the most traumatic periods in the city's history is amazing. Yeah, so Luke, thank you. Like, I was following your work at that time, and I really appreciated it. Okay, let's get to something a little, I don't know if it's lighter, but a little fun, a little breakout open discussion. So we're gonna have the gang prompt each other on something kind of a little background, a little interesting. Stephen, I believe you had something you wanted to ask Rumneek.
That's true. I actually have two things I want to ask Rumneek. First, about the bomb-sniffing dog. He didn't tell me about that. Was he a good boy?
He was a good boy. He did eat chips off the floor, though.
All right. And then second, one of my favorite things that we talked about on our podcast, but can you just tell us a little bit about the time you got a hold of a business card of a member of the Canadian Intelligence Agency, CSIS, and gave him a call?
Yes. So this was an interesting day in my life. I was doing a story. I was contacted by a source who told me that CSIS had reached out to them in regards to a riding in southwestern Ontario, and that they were doing an investigation. And so the source kind of told me that they asked questions about, ties between a particular candidate in India, and it seemed like they were doing some kind of an investigation. I then asked the source if they were given a business card from CSIS, because I wanted to be able to verify that they were in fact visited by them and weren't just making up a story to tell me. And they sent me a picture of a white business card embossed with our Canadian Spy Agency's logo on it. It had a name and it had a number. And so I told my editor, Luke, I said, this is proof that this person was in fact contacted by CSIS. I think we're ready to run the story. And Luke says, well, why don't you try calling the number on the business card? Naturally, I spiraled. I kind of paced around my kitchen, and I was like, okay, I guess I have to do this because he's asking me to do this. And I was like, they're probably not going to pick up, so it's fine. I'll just give them a ring, and it'll be over. I called the number, and somebody answered on the other line. And so I asked if their name was the name that was on the card. So I said, hi, is this blank? And they were like, yeah. And they were like, who are you? And then I was like, oh, this is going a step further than I thought it was going to go. So I tried to play as dumb as I could, because I thought if I sounded stupid, the guy would underestimate me and perhaps divulge a little bit of information. And he did. So he asked who I was. I said I was a reporter, and I was doing my due diligence by calling up the number on the CSIS card, and I just wanted to make sure that this person wasn't telling me a bogus story. He said that he could neither confirm nor deny if he worked for CSIS,
Perfect,
obviously,
right. Yeah.
which gave me an answer. And he then went, is this in regards to Arpan Khanna, who was the person who the source alleged that the investigation was regarding? I didn't even ask him that. I didn't even mention his name. He asked me. And then I was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, well, I look forward to reading your story.
Amazing.
And I was like, this went way better than I thought it was going to go.
And you showed me that card, and I was surprised to see the CSIS logo is actually a little beaver with a little detective's hat and a magnifying glass. That was surprising.
And the fact that they just leave cards, too, that's wild to me.
Rumneek, thank you
wow.
for that. Let's pass it on to Luke. I understand you have a question for Luke about some of his work.
Yes, Luke, similar to Stephen, kind of gets into these interesting situations and goes undercover and contacts people. And I want you to tell me a story about the time you went undercover for some of your reporting.
So I think you're referring to going back to the convoy stuff, because I keep coming back to it. Yeah, so during the convoy, I would go to places, and I just dress up as myself. Yeah, so I went to the baseball stadium that I was talking about earlier, and I got confronted by a couple of convoy people who thought I was a cop. Yeah, so they started questioning me. They were like, "Who do you work for? Which agency are you with?" and stuff. Wow. And I'm just like, "Yeah, I'm just checking things. I'm a local resident, Yeah, so that's my.
So that was your undercover dressing. Well,
Yeah.
you look like a cop, Luke. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, no, and then this has happened multiple times where I've been around them, and then they start asking me if I'm a cop. I don't know why I give off cop.
You look
vibes,
clean
but
cut. I think that's more it than a cop thing. You look clean cut. You look presentable, right? So, yeah, amazing. Thank you, Luke, for that. Let's pass it on. I understand there was something you wanted to ask Emily Leedham.
Sure, yeah. So one of the interesting things is with working with people in different regions around Canada is I get these glimpses into the local media cultures and local political cultures of all these different, provinces, and it's often very different from province to province. And in Saskatchewan, I've been kind of interested by how there's a real lack of media diversity there, and Emily's done some reporting on a radio host who kind of acts as I don't know how you'd want to put it, but kind of acts as a
Lapdog?
Yeah, why don't you explain?
And he's a legend. Yeah, tell us about, what's his name?
Yeah, it's John Gormley. And if you're from Saskatchewan, you know about John Gormley. If outside of Saskatchewan, you might not know, but I would describe him kind of as a Rush Limbaugh kind of character. He's the Rush Limbaugh of Saskatchewan. He would probably love that description. So yeah, I was reporting on the Saskatchewan election, and given that it's such a small media culture, and Gormley takes up so much space, there's just a lot of information there that people know, but it hasn't been written down. It hasn't been really formalized. And so one of these things is that, John Gormley would basically instruct or encourage his listeners to go after critics of the Saskatchewan Party, basically. And he would talk about, these people, these activists, and he'd be like, look at this person, look what they're doing. Isn't it so ridiculous? And he would provide information about them that would make them...
What?
able to be like located and
Like
found.
public radio doxing?
Basically, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and then these people would receive like floods, like so much harassment, and a lot of these were women specifically. So social media harassment, people would get phone calls, messages through their voicemail, just like any way that they could be harassed, they were harassed. And again, some of these were women, some of these were Indigenous women, and this was just a practice that happened. If these women were involved in organizing and criticizing the Saskatchewan Party, they would get blasted on air by John Gormley, and then the followers would just sort of pile on. And
So
this
how did you get pulled into it?
Yeah, well, I observed this, and because it's such a big presence when you go into Saskatchewan. And so I was able to talk to some people who actually filed a CRTC complaint against John Gormley, and we were able to create a story out of that CRTC complaint and highlight, like these women have tried to hold this radio station and this person accountable for actually the immense harm that he's doing to people who are like criticizing the government. So that was really important. Another story that we were able to do is noting that the radio station itself, Ralco Radio, has donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Saskatchewan Party over the years. So you have this radio station that donates to the Saskatchewan Party. You have this big radio figure who is like attacking critics of the Saskatchewan Party. It's actually so ridiculous.
Radio Pravda on the prairies. Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous how that's been just upholding the status quo.
So hearing you talk about the Gormley thing, it's the regionalism of the work these guys do which really excites me a lot, because we have the prairies covered and British Columbia, Ontario. There's also content sharing with Pivot, which is the Quebec Journalism Solidarity Cooperative, and PressProgress pieces are republished there. So really paying attention to geography and paying attention to reach and being a kind of a nation-building exercise. It's one of the things I love about PressProgress. A final anecdote, Emily, Stephen Magusiak, very presentable, very warm, people who know him love him, and Stephen's had some experience being invited into people's homes. Isn't that right? Oh, you were going to ask Stephen, actually. Why am I asking you? Can you ask Stephen about that?
It's okay, you kind of just did.
Well, yeah, tell me about you being invited into people's homes, Stephen.
There are a lot of just unforgettable moments covering the 2019 Alberta election. And one of which involved us going over donation records which were posted publicly online and noticing some really suspicious patterns, which led to the discovery of a money laundering scheme. I don't want to get too into the weeds on that. It's all on the website, but it led to another investigation where there were alleged voter ID fraud allegations. And with that, it ended up with us getting a hold of a list of every single registered voter in the United Conservative Party at that time, and everyone who had voted. And it turned out a lot of them didn't realize they had voted. So this led to Luke asking me to do something crazy, driving around.
It's a recurring theme, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Driving around Northeast Calgary, knocking on strangers' doors, and asking them if they had voted in the race.
Strangers.
There was a language barrier too.
Okay.
And one of them, nice, sweet old man, just invited me in for tea to talk. So.
Had he voted UCP?
He he had no recollection of that. This was a major RCMP investigation that lasted for, Luke, 5 years, something like that.
It was just recently concluded.
Yeah.
And there were no charges that came out of it, although the RCMP did confirm that there were hundreds of votes that they confirmed were cast and they couldn't account for it. So, yeah.
Anyways, yeah, no, I made some friends with elderly people in the Sikh community.
That's a heartwarming story. That's a beautiful story. Stephen, thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes left. And I want to say that this kind of gumshoe reporting, this sort of knocking on strangers' doors and having tea with people and having conversations, it takes support. And it takes the support of people like us who financially support PressProgress, but it takes another kind of support, a warmer, softer, fuzzier kind of support. That's right. We're talking about PressProgress. Who do our journalists go home to? Who supports them in that way? So I'm going to ask these guys just a little bit about their pets. Luke, that's a cute dog. What's his name?
His name's Rufus.
Rufus. I understand Rufus recently received a really nice gift. What did Santa Paws give him for Christmas?
So this Christmas morning, there was a present underneath the Christmas tree from Santa Paws, and when Rufus opened up the present, he discovered a Le Creuset dog dish. It was very very modern looking, very
Glamorous,
kind of like a Scandinavian cookware looking thing. He enjoys really high-end water now as a result. Yeah.
Rufus, looks like he has refined tastes. Rumneek, can we say the same for Duke? He looks anchored. He looks solid. He looks like a friend you come home to when you need a hug. But I understand that he's also a little bit bratty when you're on Zoom calls.
Yes, so Duke is my baby, although he's almost 2 and he's 100 pounds and as tall as I am. But he loves attention, and because I work from home, he somehow only wants attention when I'm on Zoom calls or doing interviews, and he has this hippo toy that like squeaks, but he likes to chew that while I'm interviewing like important people. Mm-hmm. So I'll be on a call asking them important questions, and they'll just hear like the squeak, 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 and I'm like, that's not me, that is my dog. And the amount of times I've had to apologize for him is countless, and you can even hear in my interview, sometimes I'll mute myself and just be like, Duke, and in the transcription, there's just like, Duke. But anyways, he's great, and I miss him. Those puppy dog eyes.
We got inspired to do this when we were doing a Zoom call preparing last week, and the animals kept on like attacking their owners on our Zoom call, and we were like, we have to talk about the pets. Stephen, your Gilbert is 43 years old, is that right?
Yeah, he's ancient. I think he's immortal. He's very old.
And you said he hates animals but loves people.
He does, and he's really chatty, and he also sure loves Zoom calls.
Do you have a toy that Gilbert likes to play with?
Yeah, I call it his wife pillow. It's a tiny little red thing that he just, for some reason, just loves. He doesn't really mess with toys other than that thing. He's had it for years. It's really old and gross, and yeah, I want to get rid of it, but.
I also want to point out 2 dog people, 2 cat people. Emily also represented with 2 cats, Stokely and Mugsy. And Emily, their relationship is very cute and warm. Is that right?
Yeah, they're like brothers, and they're both farm cats that our friends basically gifted to us, so they're very special to us. And yeah, we all work from home, so our pets provide a lot of comfort sitting on. They like to sit on my lap sometimes while I'm like writing, and yeah, they're very brotherly, and so they're very sweet towards each other. But sometimes they will still like to wrestle. Mm-hmm. So it's always an event when they wrestle. It takes over the whole house. They're like chasing each other. It's wild.
So I hope that seeing the pets behind the journalists helps to humanize the work they do. And it's been really interesting to hear about everybody's work and getting a bit behind the scenes. Luke, we wanted to do a little bit of a call to action, just sort of like letting people know where can they find the work, where can they find the different mediums that you guys are in.
So if you go to the website, PressProgress.ca, you will discover numerous things that you can do there. So one thing you can do is you can sign up for our newsletter. You can also sign up for Emily's newsletter, Shift Work, which is devoted to labor issues. Emily, would you briefly like to explain what Shift Work is about?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but you can also come to our table just around the corner here and find out more information as well. But yeah, if you're interested in labor news, tracking all strikes and lockouts, again, sign up for Shift Work and come by and say hi.
If you like podcasts, you'll want to check out PressProgress Sources, which Stephen's kind of the showrunner for and often has his colleagues on as guests. That's on the Harbinger Media Network. And Rumneek, you're going to be joining us for the Unrigged panel tomorrow. Wait, we can still find PressProgress on Facebook, right? Oh, okay. So we can find it on unrigged.ca? Okay, perfect. And so come check us out tomorrow at 10:15, where you'll be talking a little bit more about your work. Luke, where else can we find you guys on socials?
I think we have a Blue Sky account now. Mastodon, I think.
We're on Twitter. We're on Twitter.
Twitter, well, X, yeah, whatever
But
it's
sign
called
up for
now.
our
Yeah.
newsletter so that we can have a kind of direct relationship with our readers. Our readers can get the information they need because social media companies owned by billionaires are not reliable for working class needs. So please subscribe to our newsletter. There's a QR code right there. You can put your phone up and it'll subscribe you right there. We also have a membership program as well that we are launching, which is really exciting. So we'll have merch coming up, and that's a way that you can help support us for the next 10 years, because just to close, like, we have outlasted a lot of digital news outlets over the last 10 years. Journalism across Canada is in not a great state. So the fact that we're here and we're doing all this important work is really not to be taken for granted. It's not easy keeping an independent news outlet afloat all the time. So definitely help us keep doing this important work, and yes, support our membership program.
Emily Leedham, Stephen Magusiak, Rumneek, Johal, LeBrun, PressProgress. Come say hi to them later. Okay, thank you guys.